And we've got a great one to start us off. We've got the Canadian. I honestly don't even feel like I should give this pronunciation. So why don't we kick this to Gordo first, the resident Canadian on the program? Why don't you break down this matchup and tell us who we're talking about? I could tell you that Jacobe Smith is an All-American from Oklahoma State. I could tell you that he's a great wrestler and a physical freak, very strong. He's got knockout power, a little bit reckless, a little bit green, but ultimately he's got insane athletic upside and probably some great takedowns. But why don't you tell us about his opponent here, the Canadian with a great name and a name that will roll off the tongue of Gordo Gambles, my brother?
You mean Christien Savoie? We can go out here, talk about that, a little French accent to it. But you know what? He's a newfie, bro. That's what he is. He comes out here. He is a tough dude. And you know what? You wouldn't see Jacobe Smith hanging out at a bar, but you damn bet Christien Savoie would be there to kick your ass at that bar. I'll tell you that right now. And what he wants to do is he wants to go out there and get in a scrap. This dude will throw down. And you know what? I did tape him first. I'm not going to lie. I go out there. I'm like, okay, you know what? This guy can go out here. He can scrap. He can throw bombs. He does throw a lot of power. I do think he potentially does slow down. That is because he's so aggressive early on. His takedown game could definitely use work, but he's a guy who can go out there and land bombs if people go out there and exchange with him. And I'm like, okay, you know, I didn't look at the odds. I'm like, Canada, come on, guys. We need this. Yeah, no, I don't know, man. Jacobe Smith is a killer, bro. Like, Jacobe Smith was someone who I was extremely impressed by watching tape. And I don't say that lightly. I've been trying to be a lot more critical, a lot, throwing the honest opinion in there, but he looked good. I watched the tape and I fell in love with his hands early. He's got very good hand speed, good in-out movement. He seems to be falling in love with them as well. And you look at that wrestling pedigree too, and I know he has that in his back pocket. The guy is someone who is not only an athletic freak, but a guy who can put it all together very well, compete on the feet, have the cardio go out there, do rounds too, and has a phenomenal takedown game, to which I just mentioned was the weakness for someone like Christien Savoie. So I do think it is a showcase spot for Jacobe Smith, who does seem to have a very bright future. He's got good hand speed to compete with someone like Savoie up there, but also a huge ground game advantage, a better cardio aspect, and just pure athleticism, and does seem to be the A side of this matchup. Now, I will say, I do think Jacobe Smith's striking is still a bit green. If he does want to go out there and exchange in the pocket, the one thing Savoie does have is a decent chin, the ability to push forward. I just think it's a very low opportunity outcome. So, although I do not think the read is there, I will be cheering for my boy Savoie this weekend. I will sit here, I will wear the Canada shirt, I will wear the Canada hat, and you know what I'll say, Liam? You know what I'll say? I'll say fucking A. Just fucking A, bud. Go out there and swing, have a good time, put the pedal to the metal, and make Newfie proud. And he is a guy who I hope goes out there and does so. It's tough sledding for the kid right now. So we're hoping for the best. Jacobe sounds like a real prospect. So I don't know if I want to get in his way. That's all I got on this one. Let's go Canada. I'm picking Jacobe Smith, unfortunately. I will say the odds are not up here. I do have a potential lean on this spot, despite not me wanting to go against Canadian, but holy, Jacobe Smith looks like the real deal. And Pierce, and if I know you're going next, I just need to make sure, as you break this down, the Canadian flag in front of you, I got to hear at least 2 sorries and 3 A's, all right?
Yeah, bro, we now have the odds up in front of us, just so you know, guys. If you'd like to reference them, here they are.
Yeah, pretty big favorite. Seems to be for good reason. My question I know Liam has not seen the odds yet at all. The one prop I do see in this one, if we get a minus 625 favorite in Jacobe Smith, who, although he does not have a submission on his record, is going to be the predominant wrestler, and you can get the submission line at plus 1,000. That seems to be a decently wide line for someone in Savoie whose only loss does come by submission. So I do not mind that spot there.
Yeah, that's very interesting. We'll kick it over to Pierce before I give my thoughts on this matchup. And I will say, you guys know me. I'm a weirdo in terms of how I break down these fights. I go down rabbit holes. I go in weird directions. Sometimes I have one fight I haven't really taped. The fight that I've done the least amount on is the main event. This fight, I actually have a lot of research that I've done. So we're going to kick it over to Pierce first. What do you think about this one, brother?
Gordo, sorry. This is an awful matchup for your boy, bro. I mean, I got the Canada flag in the back, but don't get it twisted. I am not betting on Savoie. And there's 2 things wrong with Canada in this matchup. Why they spell the name Christian like that, I do not know. And Christien? They do not know how. Christian I-E-N. I've never seen that in my life. And Christien? Am I saying? Christien. And the Canadians don't know how to spell Christian, and they don't know how to wrestle. And this is probably one of the biggest squash match of the season, if I'm being honest. I mean, last week we had Titties going up against Bailey Schoenfelder. Now that was a squash match in my eyes. Looking before the fight, that's what it looked like they were trying to do, but it didn't work out that way. And this is one that I think it doesn't matter what happens. I think Jacobe Smith's got a fucking tear an ACL if he's losing this matchup against Christien. And I just think this is honestly just easy pickings for Jacobe, man. You got a D1 wrestler, All-American. I mean, he was at Liam, correct me if I'm wrong, All-American at Oklahoma State, correct?
That's correct.
Yeah, so it's like he's not like D2, D3. This is D1 All-American. And when you look at
don't denigrate, okay? Aljamain Sterling is D3 wrestler, right?
What wasn't Josh?
Stand up.
Wasn't Josh Freeman All-American in D3, bro? I question the legitimacy of some of these wrestling programs in Division 3, but I'm not going to trash on nobody. But yeah, Jacobe, man, it's like you look at his game, it's all wrestling. I mean, I know he got 2 straight quick knockouts his last fight. The dude has power in his hands. I'll give him that. But I mean, when you watch Savoie's fight against Dokash, yeah, I was shocked to see that fight was a draw. I had the double take who each guy was, and I had to go to the introductions because I'm like, is the guy getting mauled, the one being brought in on Contender Series? And it's like the ref. I think I commented on the video. I think the ref bet Savoie money line. That's why he took as many points as he did in that fight. But that looked like a 30-27 clear as day, and it somehow was a draw. And I mean, that's honestly all you really need to see in this matchup is that, yeah, I mean, on the feet, Savoie, he throws hard. It's not really technical. He kind of just goes for it. And I respect that. If Jacobe's going to stand and trade in the pocket, I mean, he's going to give him his path, bro. Just don't pull a Bailey Schoenfelder and just go for takedowns. And I don't know if the total is a bit interesting. It's 1.5 is set at minus 170 for the over. I'm not sure if I want to play the under there, but yeah, if I had to pick a bet on the fight, it'd be a round 1 prop for Jacobe or the under. It's just when you bet on these like college wrestlers turned MMA fighters, it's like a lot of them don't have the submission upside, so you're kind of banking on like a ground and pound finish from Jacobe here, which I think is possible. The dude hits hard. He's got good ground and pound. And if I had to pick a minus 600 to win, I'd probably do the under 1.5. That's probably how he covers. But yeah, no strong takes on any bets on that fight.
I think this is interesting. My guy Dixon is looking for the contrarian take. Is this another goes to decision, right? Like Nick Piccinini. I think there's a few things that are a little different about this matchup. Number one being Nick Piccinini was taking on a guy who's a pretty like crafty and like long-standing MMA fighter. That guy had a lot of fights and then disappeared for a while, and he had some problems in his personal life, things like that. But it wasn't like he wasn't a talented enough guy. My questions about him were, was he going to have cardio? Is he going to be able to hold up? And honestly, he did way better than I expected in a lot of those categories on Contender Series and made it an honest fight. So hats off to him, right? I do think that this Canadian guy is in good shape, right? I think he's showing up with a lot of, willingness and purpose. He's got some knockout power, but, the footage is just bad, right? Like that referee basically saved. Honestly, I thought he was in a position where he could have been stopped. And then the guy just like intervenes because he says shots to the back of the head. I mean, like when you talk about legal strikes in mixed martial arts, we got to understand there's a difference between hitting somebody in their brainstem, dropping an elbow like in the center of their spine or something. When you're hitting somebody on their own gloves on the side of their head, that's like most TKO finishes in MMA. Right? Like if you just look at the vast majority of ground and pound stoppages, it's somebody holding a rear waist from turtle and just punching somebody that's on the ground, like crumpled up, 2 hands over their head. And so I looked at that and I was like, man, like he took him away from a potential finishing position. And then the guy still beat his ass all night. And then he gets robbed to a draw. The guy couldn't believe it at the end of the fight. And he got a bunch of points taken away. It was a complete fugazi. So you have that stacked on top of the fight prior to that. And that was not a good look either. I'm talking about the Christien Savoie fight against Bassel Hafez. And Bassel Hafez, good fighter, right? Not a bad fighter at all. We've seen he can go out there and get takedowns. But the way he was able to take him down, pass the guard multiple times, get in these good positions. I mean, he was honestly going for like meme-like submissions, like mounted arm bars and triangles right off the rip because he just felt very comfortable attacking this guy. And he made a few mistakes. Like he fell off the top. He did a couple things sideways, but I don't think that Jacobe's going to do any of that, right? Like he's the opposite of that in terms of he's a wrestler, not a jiu-jitsu guy, not a guy who's, credited with this black belt and he wants to go out there and show his techniques and look for triangles from underneath. I don't see any of that. I could see him going for a rear naked choke here if this guy just shells up, turns away, gets into a rear waist cinch and he grabs him from behind, something like that. But for the most part, Jacobe just comes out swinging crazy and he tries to kill people. And that is a good system for getting a contract on Contender Series. But from a downside perspective, I do think he has the makings of somebody who could gas out really bad on Contender Series. He's shown a pretty violent game. He comes out explosive. I think there's a lot of the right elements, but the one thing I worry about is the fight that he had. Let me go back and look at his record because I don't want to speak out of turn, but I watched a bunch of tape on Jacobe.
Probably the Lewis
and I'm high on him. The
Levon Lewis. Yep.
No, actually, you'll be surprised, dude. It was the Tommy Britton fight. And now he beat Tommy, just every which way but loose, right? But it was the shot selection. It was the way he was throwing. Honestly, they stopped that fight and Tommy Britton protested at the time. I don't know if you remember. He was not happy with the stoppage because he was trying to let the guy unload and get tired. And now you can't do that, right? Like it's eligible for stoppage when you do that. But I do think that this is the kind of spot where, you saw in that fight, Jacobe Smith was out there winging huge uppercuts, taking these huge chances. His hands were down. He was swinging wild. What did we just see last week? Big favorite, guy who probably had more skill, but you get clipped early. What do they say? If you're a black belt, you get punched in the face, you're a purple belt. I mean, whatever happened to Schoenfelder, he just wasn't there anymore, right? He was seeing ghosts. And I'm not saying that it's the same situation. It's not a one-to-one. I think Jacobe Smith is a better prospect than Bailey Schoenfelder by a mile, right? But you just look at the downside risk of you're on Contender Series where the incentive structure is go out there, get an early knockout, swing like crazy, do something wild, impress the boss. If you do that and then you don't get it, then it could turn into what Dixon said. Either he's grinding on this guy, just getting the easy takedowns. I do think takedowns are free against this guy personally for Jacobe, unless he's completely gassed out here. So that's for me why he's such a big favorite here. On the feet, I think he could knock him out. I think it would be a competitive, honest fight. I think he could take him down and ground and pound him. I think he could surprise people with a submission. I did not like the ground game I saw from Savoie. However, he's training at Champions Creed. If I'm talking Canadian MMA and I'm giving some love and respect, it's to my guy, Chad and Hellinger and the Champions Creed folks, they've done a pretty good job of developing prospects over time. So let's see what they have to offer here. But overall, I think Jacobe Smith is going to get the job done, and I would not be surprised by any method of victory. I just think he's got a lot of advantages, and the takedown upside, I feel, will be substantial. Anything you guys want to add before we move to the next fight?
Thoughts and prayers to Canada here. Hopefully see one go through the hoop. Yeah, we got to have it. What I will say is if you are seeing potential value on Savoie, which I'm not, I don't know how much either of us are in the spot here. I do believe this to be a spot where Jacobe's going to get steamed the next day. I mean, we saw Shannon Clark, Canadian legend, get bet up to -2,000 the day of. We saw Bailey Schoenfeld get some action last week. But I think it's a spot where a lot of people are trying to see, are beginning to see who the A side of the matchup is, who the better wrestler, who the guy with better pedigree is here. And I do think because of that, a lot of money's going to come in his way. So typically I like to wait for domestics, but I don't know how much better line I'm going to get on a sub line for Jacobe, so I might take it early.
Yeah, somebody asked in the chat, I think it's a great question. Local man shakes fist. At what price do you have interest, though, is the question. I would say anything over 10-1 is probably just off in a welterweight fight between two people that don't have that much professional experience. Jacobe Smith still working with under 10 professional fights, and most of them have ended pretty early. So for that reason, I would say, maybe slight tempered expectations. You can't get ahead of yourself in mixed martial arts. I say it all the time. But also, I just think that there is a pretty big, I talk about sometimes if somebody's a striker, right, they don't really have the tools to cover these big prices. But there are worlds in which Jacobe Smith takes this guy down for 14 minutes, and then it does look like he covers the price. You know what I'm saying? Or he just finishes him in round one by taking him down and getting to a dominant position. So for those reasons, I think there is some negative downside to him looking like a massive favorite, but shout out to Real Fight Picks as Jacobe being -600, silly, fair play. Weird they got Smith listed at 6'2" on Tapology when he's like 5'10". Yeah, fair enough. So a couple of dissenters in the chat, and maybe that's why the line hasn't run yet. Gordo, there's some people that like the dog here, and I mean, he does look big, he looks strong, he looks physical, but I do think there's a huge pedigree difference in the wrestling. So let's see how it shakes out. The cardio is always a question mark for me with these wrestlers, because I'll tell you guys, it's a way different sport to go out there and wrestle for 7 minutes and to fight for 15. And a lot of times you see wrestlers that can wrestle for 7 minutes in MMA and then they get finished in round 3. So just one thing to think about.